Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the world of cybercrime.
Yeah.
And specifically how to avoid becoming a victim of it.
Right.
We're going to be looking at a YouTube interview with Amit Dubey.
Okay.
He's a cybersecurity expert and he's really seen it all. So get ready for some wild stories, but also some really practical advice that you can use right away.
Yeah, you know what really struck me was just how much Dubey's approach is grounded in real world examples. He's not talking theory, he's really painting this vivid picture, using stories to show just how real these dangers are.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, some of the stuff he talked about made me rethink some of my own online habits.
Really?
I always thought phone hacking was mostly about viruses,
Yeah, that's what most people think. But Dubey explains that even things that seem harmless, like Bluetooth and those public friend lists that we see on social media, they can actually be used against us.
Oh, wow.
In ways that most people don't even realize.
So, what's the deal with Bluetooth then?
Well, it turns out Bluetooth has all these different profiles, each one's designed for a specific purpose.
Okay.
And some of those profiles, if they're not properly secured, they can actually let someone control your phone remotely.
Really?
They can even send messages from it without you knowing.
That's unsettling because, how many of us just leave Bluetooth on all the time just for convenience?
Right. It's a trade-off we make, isn't it, between convenience and security?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk more about some practical steps that you can take to kind of minimize those risks later on.
Okay.
But first, I want to get back to some of the real-world stuff that Dubey talks about. There's this one story that really stuck with me. He was talking about this place where 750 iPhones are stolen every single month.
Wow, 750 iPhones a month?
Yeah.
That's not just some petty theft. It's like a whole operation.
Exactly. It shows just how organized this is and how phone theft is really big business. And these criminals are always, kind of one step ahead.
It's scary to think about how vulnerable we are.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the device being stolen either.
Right.
Dubey also talked about metadata.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, I've heard that term, but I'm not totally sure what it means.
Think of it as the digital footprint left behind by everything you do.
Okay.
So for example, even without listening to your actual conversations, just by looking at your call logs, the pattern of your calls, that can be really revealing.
Huh.
If investigators see an unusual number of short calls, that could raise a red flag.
So even if the content of our conversations is private, just the fact that we're communicating in a certain way can be dangerous.
Exactly. It's another layer of information that they can use.
Wow. We also got a great question from a listener who was wondering about how safe it is to buy a used phone online.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
What does Dubey have to say about that?
Well, first he says it's really important to check the phone's IMI number to make sure it hasn't been reported stolen.
Okay.
And he also highly recommends doing a factory reset after you buy it just to wipe any potential malware.
Good advice.
Right.
Okay, you have to hear this story about an auditor who was faking on-site inspections using just his phone.
Oh, yeah, the auditor story.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how clever these criminals can be. This guy figured out how to manipulate his phone's activity logs and photos to make it seem like he was physically there.
Wow.
When he was actually somewhere else entirely.
So he wasn't just stealing data, he was creating a whole false reality.
Exactly. And to make things even more convincing, he submitted expense reports for meals on travel.
Oh, wow.
So it really looked like he had been to all those places.
This makes you think twice about how much you can trust what you see online.
Right.
Or in reports, even seemingly solid evidence can be faked.
Absolutely.
So how do we find the balance between being appropriately skeptical, but still being able to trust, people and systems?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
Dubey says that blind trust can be really dangerous.
Right.
But on the other hand, if we eliminate trust altogether, our society just wouldn't function.
Yeah.
We need to find that sweet spot, where we're informed and vigilant, but not totally paranoid.
Yeah.
And that's where awareness and practical tips come in, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to that. Welcome back. I don't know about you, but after that last segment, I'm feeling a little bit more on edge about the dangers online.
Right. It can be a little unnerving.
Yeah, but like you said, knowledge is power.
Exactly. The more we understand these scams, the better we can protect ourselves.
So let's talk about some of those practical tips. What are some red flags that we should be looking for?
Well, one thing that cybercriminals often do is try to create a sense of urgency.
Okay.
They might say that your account's been compromised.
Right.
Or that you need to act immediately to avoid something terrible happening.
Gotcha.
They're really playing on our emotions.
Yeah, that makes sense. When we're feeling panicked or stressed, we're more likely to make bad decisions.
Exactly. So anytime you get a message that you weren't expecting,
Okay.
especially if it's asking for personal information,
Right.
or financial details.
Yeah.
Just take a deep breath and really think about it critically.
So don't click on any links or open attachments unless you're absolutely sure about the sender.
Right, and pay close attention to the sender's email address. Are there any typos?
Oh, yeah.
Or does it look a little bit off?
Okay.
And if you have even the slightest doubt, contact the organization directly through their official website or their phone number.
That's a good point. Doobie also talked a lot about strong passwords.
Yeah, we all know we should be using them.
Right. It's a pain to remember a bunch of complicated passwords.
Yeah.
But it is really important for our online security.
Absolutely. A strong password should be at least 12 characters long.
Okay.
And it should include a mix of uppercase and lowercase, letters, numbers, and symbols.
Right. And don't use the same password for multiple accounts.
Yeah, if one gets compromised, you don't want them all to fall like dominoes.
Speaking of passwords, what about password managers? Are those worth using?
I think they're a great idea. They store all your passwords securely, so you only have to remember one master password.
Oh, okay.
It takes the pressure off of trying to memorize a ton of different combinations.
Yeah, that does sound pretty helpful. I think I might look into that.
Yeah.
Doobie also mentioned two-factor authentication.
Oh, yeah. That's another important one.
I've heard of it, but can you explain exactly how it works?
Sure. It basically adds an extra layer of security to your accounts.
Okay.
So you need to provide two different forms of identification.
Okay.
Something, like your password and something you have like a code sent to your phone.
Oh, I see. So even if someone steals your password,
Right.
they still can't get in.
Exactly. It's like having a double lock on your door.
I like that analogy.
It's a really simple step, but it can make a big difference.
Something else that stood out to me was how much Dubé emphasized backing up our data.
It's so important.
It's one of those things that I know I should be doing regularly,
Mm-hmm.
but I always seem to put it off.
I get it, but trust me, if your device is ever lost or stolen,
Yeah.
or even just damaged, those backups can be an absolute lifesaver.
Imagine losing all your photos and important documents.
Oh, it doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah. So what are the best ways to back these up?
Well, you can back up to the cloud,
Okay.
an external hard drive, or both for extra security.
Okay.
The key is to find a method that works for you and actually do it regularly.
Make it a habit.
Right.
We've talked about the importance of strong passwords and two-factor authentication, but we all have these habits.
Yeah.
Like leaving our Bluetooth and Wi-Fi on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something we should be rethinking?
Well, Doobie says that leaving those connections on all the time, especially Bluetooth,
Okay.
can actually make you more vulnerable to hacking.
Right, because like we talked about earlier, Bluetooth can be used to control your device remotely.
Exactly. And you might not even realize it's happening.
So the best practice is to turn off Bluetooth and Wi-Fi when we're not using them.
Especially public Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I'm always a little hesitant to use those anyway.
You're right to be cautious. You never know who might be snooping on your activity.
So if you do have to use public Wi-Fi, what should you do?
Well, a VPN is a good option.
A VPN.
Yeah, a virtual private network.
Can you explain how those work?
Basically, it creates a secure, encrypted connection between your device and the internet.
Okay,
Think of it like a tunnel that protects your data.
gotcha.
It makes it a lot harder for hackers to intercept your information.
So it's basically adding an extra layer of security,
Exactly.
even when you're on a public network.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of ways to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But what if, despite our best efforts, we do become a victim of a scam?
That's a good question.
What should we do?
Well, Doobie says that it's really important to report any cybercrime incidents to the authorities.
Even if it seems like a small thing?
Yeah, even if you think it's not a big deal.
Okay, why is that so important?
Well, by reporting it, you can help law enforcement agencies track patterns
Oh, okay.
and identify the criminals.
Gotcha.
And it could even help you recover your losses or prevent others from becoming victims.
Right, it's about more than just the individual case.
Exactly. It's about contributing to the biggest fight against cybercrime.
It's like reporting any other crime.
That's a good way to think about it.
Dubé also had some interesting things to say about the role of banks in all of this.
Yeah, he's a big believer that banks should be held responsible for fraudulent transactions when it's not the customer's fault.
Oh, interesting.
He thinks that if banks knew they would be financially liable, it would encourage them to invest more in security and fraud prevention.
But wouldn't that probably lead to higher banking fees for everyone?
That's a possibility. It's a complicated issue
Yeah.
with potential trade-offs. But I think Dubé's point is really important. It's
Yeah.
about figuring out who's responsible and how we can create a system that protects consumers.
Right, we've covered a lot of ground in terms of practical tips for staying safe online.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to hear more about Dubé's personal story
Me too.
and what drives his passion for this work.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect transition into the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll be exploring the human side of cybercrime and looking at the broader societal impact of this growing threat.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. It's been a wild ride, right?
And it has. We've talked about so many different things, like those crazy scams, those practical tips we can all use.
And that auditor who was using his phone to fake those inspections?
Oh, yeah, that story was unbelievable.
It really was. But now I want to talk about the bigger picture,
Okay.
What does all this mean for society?
That's where it gets really interesting. Cybercrime isn't just about individual victims.
Right.
It affects all of us. It erodes our trust in institutions and even in each other.
Yeah, Doobie talked about that, and it really resonated with me because we're constantly hearing about data breaches and scams.
Right.
It's easy to get cynical.
Absolutely. We start to assume the worst about everything.
Yeah, and when we're always questioning people's motives, it makes it harder to collaborate, to build community.
Exactly.
Even just to do business.
It's like this constant anxiety in the background of our digital lives.
Yeah, and all these warnings about threats. It can be really exhausting.
Absolutely. And that stress isn't just limited to individuals.
Right.
Think about businesses that are constantly under threat or critical infrastructure that could be attacked.
Oh yeah, the stakes are getting higher and higher.
They really are. It's like we're fighting a war on multiple fronts.
So is there any hope?
Well,
are we just going to be playing catch up with these criminals forever?
Dubé actually offered a pretty optimistic perspective.
Really?
He thinks we're at a turning point.
Okay.
Awareness is growing.
Yeah.
Resources are being put into cybersecurity, and international cooperation is increasing.
You talked about how law enforcement is becoming more sophisticated.
Right.
And new technologies like AI are being used to fight back.
Exactly. It's like an arms race.
Yeah.
With both sides constantly evolving their tactics.
So technology is part of the solution.
It is, but it's not the whole story.
Okay.
We need strong laws to hold these criminals accountable.
Right.
And education is key. Doobie is a big advocate for starting cybersecurity education early.
Oh, really?
Yeah, teaching kids not just the technical skills, but also digital citizenship.
That makes sense. It's not just about knowing how to create a strong password.
Right.
It's about understanding the impact of your actions online.
Exactly, and being able to think critically about the information you see.
So we need to prepare future generations to navigate this digital world safely.
Absolutely.
So what's next?
I mean,
what are the big trends in cybersecurity that we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, one thing that's becoming really clear is that the line between the physical and digital worlds is blurring.
Oh, yeah.
Cyber attacks can have real-world consequences and vice versa.
We've already seen attacks on power grids and hospitals.
Exactly. And as more and more devices become connected to the internet, our cars, our homes, even our appliances, that attack surface is just getting bigger.
It's a little scary to think about.
It is. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity.
Okay.
We need to move beyond protecting individual devices.
Right.
And start thinking about securing entire ecosystems.
So security needs to be built into the design from the beginning.
Exactly. And we also need to be thinking about AI.
Yeah.
It's going to be huge in cybersecurity.
In good ways and bad ways.
Right. It can be a powerful tool for good. It can analyze data, detect patterns, respond to threats much faster than any human.
And it can free up analysts to do more strategic work.
Exactly. But there's also the risk that AI could be used for malicious purposes.
Right.
Which is why we need ethical guidelines and regulations.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
It is. It's a whole new frontier full of possibilities and potential dangers.
So after this deep dive, what are the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
Well, more than anything, I want them to understand that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. It's not just about experts or law enforcement.
That's right.
We all have a role to play.
Yeah, even small actions can make a difference.
Exactly. Things like being careful about what we share online.
Right.
Using strong passwords, reporting anything suspicious.
It all adds up.
It does, and knowledge is power. The more we know about the risks, the better we can protect ourselves.
And if the worst does happen and someone does become a victim, it's important to remember that you're not alone.
Right.
There are resources out there to help.
Don't be afraid to reach out.
This has been a really insightful conversation.
It has.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. It's been great talking to you.
And to all of our listeners, we highly recommend checking out Amit Dubé's YouTube channel for even more information.
Yeah, he's got some great stuff.
And please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. What steps are you taking to stay safe online?
Yeah, let's learn from each other.
Let's work together to create a more secure future for everyone.